Shalom Aleichem Chazian Mughibe, Ana Ivan Romena Jonas, Shenetitun al Khurze doing business in America. Khurzet udu ile bazet basics of import and export. پیش الهود را به میقرا هنگ واینر قد کپالخ قیس پی سکور إلى خابهاوت small business administration. اودیو بازت import بتهمزمخ شبتت اتیا بتهمزمخ بازت export. عادی از اختبقخ به میقرا هنگ واینر. Hank, welcome to our show.
Thank you very much.
Hank, before we start our program, can you tell us a few things about yourself?
Yes, well, my experience is 40 years in the export-import business. I started back in the 1960s. I worked overseas, primarily in Asia, but also Europe. I spent 25 years, lived in 7 different countries, and my company exported and imported all different types of products. We were considered a general trading company. And my last position before I retired was the vice president for all of Asia.
Perfect. And right now you work as a volunteer at the school. Maybe you can tell us something about SCORE, because not too many people know
SCORE
about
was
it.
usually used to be called the Service Corps of Retired Executives, but they've changed the name. Now it's still SCORE, but we are counselors to America's small business because many of us are not retired. We're all experienced businessmen with many years' experience. We work under the Small Business Administration. We give free counseling to new businesses and businesses that are in trouble, trying to utilize our experience to help those businesses.
And there are SCORE offices all over the country,
All
correct?
over the United States. Every city has a SCORE office. In the East Bay, we have 40 counselors. We also have offices in San Francisco, San Jose, and in Santa Rosa.
That's wonderful. I have used the SCORE office before, and it's been very, very helpful. You get tremendous amount of experience, years of experience, without having to pay anything. So it's consulting for free.
Right.
Please take advantage of it. Now we can start with the program. Adivi mun amman miqra hank tave hamzuma bazit basics of importing.
Well, today we're going to talk about the basics of importing. Again, my name is Hank Weiner, SCORE counselor, and my basic information is on this slide. So that if you want further information or you want to email me, please feel free to do so. So let's get started. First, we're going to talk about the elements of importing. That is, what are we going to import? Why are we importing it? Once we import it, can we sell it? Where are we going to get our imports from? We have to find sources of products. What regulations apply to our imports? We need to do the research for that. And how are we going to price our products and get them to the market? Finally, we're going to talk about the import process, the mechanics of getting the products from overseas into the United States. So let's get started with that. First, how do we find products to import? First of all, if you have contacts overseas, you know people, you can ask them to help you find products. Foreign embassies and consulates with offices in the United States also have buyer's guides, directories of exporters in their country, directory of manufacturers that you can access. Foreign chambers of commerce in the United States, just like the United States has chambers of commerce abroad. Other countries have their chambers of commerce here trying to promote business. And you can find those at that website that's on the slide, foreigntrade.com/chambers. Your local library has buyer's guides to foreign countries. There's buyer's guides for China, buyer's guides for Brazil that list manufacturers in those countries. There are trade shows and trade missions from foreign countries that come here looking for buyers of their products, and you can actually take a trip to a foreign country and go to a trade show in that country and search for products that way. And then we have something we call off the shelf. You're traveling and you see something interesting, you take it off the shelf, you look at it, and you say, yes, this would be a good seller in the United States. You contact the supplier that way. And finally, we have the internet. We have lots of websites, which I will give you some of later, that I call buy and sell. You're looking to buy a product, you go on Alibaba, you go on global sources, and you can find millions of products for you to import. But you need to be very careful about that because you have to know who's at the other end. Remember, in almost every case, an importer is going to send money abroad before he sees the goods. So with that caveat, the internet is still a very good place to find products to import. So you need to do some research and investigation. So let's start with customs duties and general regulations. Those are all found at the customs website, cbp.gov. That includes the duty calculations, what countries you cannot import from, and many other regulations. For example, we have bans. There are some things you cannot import. There are some countries you cannot import from. We have anti-dumping regulations, which mean that you can't import a product at a cheaper price than it's sold in the country of origin. And we have certain trade sanctions. We have some very strange things. For example, you can import rugs from Iran, but you can't import wood. So now we have an importer who imported carpets in wooden frames, and when it got to this country, they had to tear the frames apart. He could have the rugs. He had to send the wood back to Iran. Those are the kind of things you need to look up when you're doing your research. We have certain agencies that regulate imports, the FDA, Federal Communications Commission, the United States Department of Agriculture, Consumer Product Safety Commission, and a couple of others. And all of the various regulations and those agencies are listed at the customs website. So once you've done your homework, now we have to go through the steps of getting an import into the United States. First of all, as I said earlier, whoever you're buying it from, you need to check them out. Make sure they're reliable. If they can give you references, they should do so. Find out how many years they've been in business. If the company's been in business for a long period, that's a pretty safe sign. If they only started 6 months ago or a year or two, you probably want to be careful. You can ask your bank to get references from the seller's bank and check their credit rating and their history that way. If the product you're going to import is available in sample, if they're small and you can get samples, it is generally, the procedure is to have two samples sent to you. You approve one and you send the other sample back to the supplier with your okay on it. So that we then have counter samples. The buyer and the seller each have their own samples so that when the products finally reach the United States, you know you're getting exactly what you ordered. Obviously, if you're going to import big pieces of machinery, you're not going to be able to get samples. All the more reason you need to be careful that you're dealing with a reliable supplier. Once you have that supplier and you've agreed in general what you're going to import, you're going to get from the supplier, the exporter in the other country, a pro forma invoice, essentially a sales contract. It isn't really an invoice yet or a contract until you decide to finance it. But you'll review that pro forma, you'll make sure it is exactly what you ordered, and if it is, you can then go ahead and finance it. You as the importer will have a customs broker who will help you get the products through U.S. Customs. And you might want the goods inspected. If it's something valuable and you're not sure of your supplier, you might want to have an inspection agency overseas inspect the goods before they're shipped. If so, you would have to select that and tell the shipper that you are going to have them inspected. You may buy the products at a price CIF, that is Cost, Insurance, Freight, USA, in which case you don't have to worry about shipping. But many overseas exporters want you to take care of the shipping. They will only give you a price FOB Hong Kong or FOB Milan or wherever, which means that you then must select the shipping method and instruct the exporter how you want the goods shipped. And finally, if you are arranging shipment, you must also arrange cargo insurance. Your customs brokers and freight forwarders sell that type of insurance. Now, whether or not you arrange shipping and insurance will depend on terms of the contract, and those are called Incoterms, as I have in red underneath here. And we're going to be talking about Incoterms a little later on. But those are standard terms that every importer and exporter has to be familiar with. So once the goods are shipped, there are certain documents that are required for the goods to enter the United States. A basic custom entry form, which is filled out by your customs broker. A bill of lading, which is the receipt from the airline company or the shipping company entitling you to ownership of the goods. And the commercial invoice or pro forma invoice we talked about before, which is a complete description of the goods. There may also be a packing list if there's a lot of boxes or packages describing what is in each one. You must have a customs bond if the shipment is over $2,000, and that is put up by your customs broker. In many cases, you will need a certificate of origin, and the customs website will tell you if you do or not. Your customs broker will tell you that. And so that would be supplied by your supplier to certify that the goods were actually produced in that certain country. And again, if you require any other services from your supplier overseas, such as inspection, such as weight, if you're buying something that is sold by weight, perhaps you want a weight certificate. Any documents like that must be included at the time the goods enter the United States. A relatively easy way to find out about this in more detail is a basic guide to importing. That's available at the customs website, cbp.gov, and you can get it on Amazon for about $8 or $9. But it is a step-by-step tutorial on how to go through these steps of importing. The pricing of imports is very important because many of you go abroad and you see something very cheap and it's $2 in Thailand and you know that's selling for $25 here and you think you're going to make a killing. But you need to remember, on top of that $2 in Thailand, what other things go into the cost of the product. So let's look at those for a minute. You can start at ex works value, which is the price at the factory in the foreign country. And then we have the export packing, the hauling it to the port or the airport, any loading or wharfage fees at the origin point. And then, of course, is the actual ocean or air freight and insurance. And as you'll see, there are asterisks on that PowerPoint slide. And again, it is dependent on terms of sale. If you're buying it with an Incoterm that says X works, then you're responsible for all those costs. If you're buying it CIF, cost, insurance, freight to destination, you don't have to worry about them. They're included in the price that you're being offered. But then on top of that cost, we have the other side. Once the product is here, you have financing costs. You had to pay money. You've had to put up money in advance. You've got interest. You've got, if you're using a letter of credit through a bank, you've got the bank fees. You've got custom entry fees that you pay your customs broker to help you get the products through customs. You have the duty rate, which is paid to the government. Then you have to transport it once it gets to the United States to your warehouse or to your customers. You've got to pay for warehousing. You've got marketing and other overhead costs. So all that goes into that $2 we talked about originally in Thailand, and that is why it drives it up to $20 or whatever. And the point here is that you need to do the research and get an exact landed cost before you can bring the product to market to ensure you're going to make a profit. We need to prepare our products for the U.S. market. They have to be packaged In many cases, if your product is going to be sold through a retailer who uses barcode scanners, you will have to provide the barcode. You have to provide labeling that conforms with US FDA requirements if it's a food or drug product. There are other regulations in electrical products. You have underwriters' labs that goes on the electrical cords. There's operating instructions if your product requires any special technical know-how. All that has to be included. If it requires after-sales service, you need to have an agency that is going to provide that. And most important of all, before you bring a product to market, is to do a marketing plan. Marketing plans at SCORE or anybody else that teaches about marketing plans are usually broken down into what we call the 4 Ps. The product itself, is it the right product, the right price, the right place, is it being sold through the right outlets, and promotion, is it being promoted properly? And that will ensure that you avoid the biggest mistake made by all importers, and that is once they get the product in the United States, they pay the duty, they know all that, they can't market it properly, it doesn't sell. So be sure to do a marketing plan. So let's talk about the import process. Here we're talking about, in detail, about that pro forma contract. We'll go through the transaction itself. Shipment is arranged. Documents are presented by the exporter for payment, and you, as the importer, will have been charged. So let's look at the details of a pro forma invoice. The first item is a complete description of the goods. We're not talking about 100 cases of Heineken's beer. We're talking about 100 cases, Heineken's beer, 12-ounce cans per case. 100 dozen men's Oxford cloth light blue shirts, 20% large, 50% medium, 30% small, button-down collar, as much detail as you can get. Then we need a price. And we need a price with a shipping term, an Incoterm, because $12.95 a dozen wouldn't mean anything without an Incoterm. Is it $12.95 at your house? Is it $12.95 at the supplier's factory? Or somewhere in between? So we have a price and we have an Incoterm. We then need a payment terms. How are you going to pay for these goods? And we're going to discuss in the next section these in detail, but the point here is that a payment term has to be shown on the pro forma invoice. And finally, on the pro forma invoice, again, if inspection certificates, if Food and Drug Administration approval numbers, any other documents that you and your supplier overseas settled on, they must be shown on the pro forma invoice. Now, we have to get to the methods of payment. We're going to be talking about open account. We're going to be talking about prepayment, that's cash in advance, documentary collections, documents against payment, and letters of credit. We also have in international trade credit cards now, and if you are an importer and you have your supplier overseas accepts credit cards, that's fine. That's a great way to pay for your product. But if you're not using credit cards, you are going to be using one of these 4 other terms. So let's look at those 4. Open account means the goods are shipped to the buyer, in this case you, and you don't pay for them until after they arrive. No risk at all to the buyer, all risk to the seller. The opposite of that is prepayment, usually by telegraphic transfer, where you as the importer are expected to send all the money to your supplier, and only then will they ship you the product. What happens, all risk is to the buyer because you've sent the money and you haven't seen any products yet. No risk to the seller. So what we have here are two ways of payment that have a lot of risk attached to them. So, to mitigate that risk, we have something called letters of credit. These have been around for hundreds of years, and without letters of credit, we probably wouldn't have international trade. These letters of credit are issued through the banks, from the buyer's bank to the seller's bank, and what they essentially do is put the banks in the middle as escrow agents, so that you, as the importer, you put the money in your bank. But the instructions are that the money is not released to the seller's bank until the seller has proved to their bank that they have actually shipped the product. So that protects you, the buyer, that you know that your money isn't going to go ahead until your seller has shipped. And it protects the seller, because the seller knows and has been notified by the bank that the money is there and that they can get it as soon as they prove that they've made shipments. So both parties have protection. There are irrevocable letters of credit and revocable ones, but revocable letters of credit are really useless, because once the letter of credit is open, the seller has to be sure that the buyer won't change their mind. So really talking about irrevocable letters of credit. There are site letters of credit, and those are the usual, where the seller will collect the money from the bank at site, means as soon as he shows shipment. But there are also 60-day letters of credit or 90-day usance credits, where the seller is willing to give the buyer a little extra time and doesn't collect the money from the bank for 60 or 90 days. And we have confirmed letters of credit, which means that if the foreign bank that is transmitting the payment to the seller is a little shaky, or in a country that may have banking problems, a seller can ask the bank to confirm the foreign bank's letter of credit with their own confirmation, which means that if something happens to the foreign bank, the local bank, the American bank, will guarantee payment. Bank letters of credit can be expensive. They're at least $300, $400, $500 in that range minimum. So we have something, a little cheaper version of a letter of credit called a documentary collection, DP, Documents Against Payment, where the buyer has not put the money in the bank, but tells the seller, please ship the goods, send the documents to my bank, and when the documents arrive, I will go down and collect them and pay for them. Because without documents, the buyer cannot get the goods off the dock. So the risk here is that the buyer changes his mind while the goods are en route, or goes bankrupt, and the goods end up in the foreign country, and the buyer does not come down to collect the documents. Well, the exporter has not lost the goods. They can sell them to someone else or bring them back. This is not used much in the United States because our customers are too far away. But in Europe, documents against payment are used all the time, because if a German supplier has to take the goods back from an Italian customer, it isn't a big problem. So basically, in the United States, we're talking about the safest form of payment being letter of credit. Importers use customs brokers. Unless you're using a courier service or the post office that delivers to your house, you will have to have a customs broker at the airport or at the dock to help you clear the goods. They can help you determine what the duty rate is going to be, how they're classified. They will prepare the customs documents, import declaration as it's called. They will coordinate the paperwork between the carrier, that is the airline or the steamship company, the container freight station where the goods are unloaded, and get them to a delivery trucker to get the goods delivered. And they are the ones that provide the bond for you to the U.S. Customs and can sell you ocean or air insurance if you do need it. They can go farther than that. They can provide inland delivery. Once the goods are cleared, the customs broker will call you and ask you to either pick them up on the port, or you can provide delivery, of course, at an extra charge. They can provide warehousing. And Similar to CPA, they can advocate on your behalf with the U.S. Customs if you have a problem. The Customs doesn't charge you the right duty. The Customs broker will help you with compliance with regulations. So they're a very valuable resource. They are not expensive, and you should use them. Now let's talk about some of the internet sites that will be helpful to you to carry forward here. First of all, we have tutorials, how-to, step-by-step explanations. Tradeport.org is one of the best for that. And for Incoterms, ibt.net. Complete descriptions of all Incoterms. SGS.com is a worldwide inspection service. If you're importing something valuable and you feel that you need someone to inspect the product before it's shipped, you can use SGS. This is a good time to say something else, though. Why importers need to be careful about who they do business with. Because even with using a letter of credit, banks do not open containers and shipping companies do not open containers. So that if a shipper, the exporter that you're buying from, delivers a container to the shipping company and says, I have $100,000 worth of computers in there, they will get a bill of lading and a receipt for $100,000 worth of computers. And the seller can then go to the bank and present that document and say, here's a document for $100,000 worth of computers. Give me my money. And the container gets here, and it's full of waste paper. It can happen. And that you do need to still have a reliable supplier to avoid that. And that's when SGS.com or having a buying agent in the foreign country, somebody that works on your behalf, becomes very valuable. CB Fank is the Customs Brokers Forwarders Association of Northern California, and that's where you can find a customs broker. ZPOL, helping you find reliable suppliers. BerkeleySG.com, Berkeley Sourcing Group. That is a company that helps you get products made in China. And finally, the bottom one is Cyber MSU, Michigan State University's International School of Business, as just a very good help page on step-by-steps importing. Actually finding products, some of the more reliable sites, Alibaba, Global Sources, Compass, HKTDC, TradeKey, all of those have buyer feedback similar to what Amazon does or eBay. So you can see how other importers fare with them. Most of them are very reliable because if they get any complaints about suppliers on their website, they quickly try to kick them off because it ruins their business model. Finally, at the bottom, we have sendfromchina.com because there are many importers here who import small quantities from China, which are too small for ocean or air cargo, but can be combined with a company like Send from China at a cheaper rate than FedEx or DHL might charge. Finally, I am available for questions and answers. I do email counseling. My email address is down below, as is my telephone number, and I thank you for listening to this presentation.